Hello, I'm Riele, and today I would like to share this painting process with you while talking some nonsense. This scene was inspired by the Roman ruins in Lausanne, Switzerland. The first signs of the Roman presence near Lake Geneva date back to the 1st century BC on a spot of a former Celtic settlement. And what began as a military camp soon grew into a proper town or a vicus with a basilica, a forum, a port, and even a theatre. The inscriptions carry the ancient name of the vicus, Loana. If I'm not mistaken, this exact spot is the remains of a temple. According to the inscriptions, Neptune, Hercules, and Mercury, patrons of navigation and trade, were worshipped here. And this is not by chance. Loana was located along a Roman road that served as a trade route between Italy and the colonies. Speaking about the Roman roads, or Via Romanae, I'd like to tell you about a very curious artifact that shows how Romans themselves viewed their ecumeny. It is a 12th century copy of a late Roman road map that attests Loana, or rather the Lake Geneva, Lacus Loana. It is a parchment roll almost 7 meters long and 37 centimeters tall that covers roads from the British Isles to Central Asia. This map is called Tabula Peutingeriana, after one of its earliest known owners, a 16th century humanist Conrad Peutinger. It is now kept as Codex Vindobonensis 324 at the National Library of Austria in Vienna, or as Romans called it, Vindobona. You can look at its facsimile and explore its alternative geography yourself. Coming back to the painting. I love painting ruins because they are unmatched in combining natural and man-made shapes. They have artificial regularity, and yet their structure is broken in places. And temples, when in ruins, accumulate a special kind of spiritual energy that has power even over such infidels as myself. Furthermore, I am obsessed with material remnants of the past, regardless of how distant it is. When I was younger, I wished to study archaeology, paleontology, comparative linguistics, molecular evolution, or even pathology, you name it. When I chose to study biology, I tried to keep some of these doors open, but some dreams are destined to remain dreams, and here I am studying ion channels. The footage starts with me blocking in the general values to cover the white of the paper. Unfortunately, I did not record the very beginning of the painting process. I used pen pastel and sennelier sticks, which are very soft and can be applied both directly and with special applicators that come with pen pastel. I used white pastel matte paper, and there are plenty of reasons why 99 times out of 100 using white paper is a bad idea, even if you don't leave any areas unpainted. The major reason is that it is way more difficult to match a color against white than against some neutral background. This is ultimately because of how our visual system works. Our receptors are not exact photometers that could spit out the exact spectra of light coming from the objects. Rather, they compare signals coming from different neighboring receptors. For example, a blue object, when projected onto the retina, does not just excite the blue or short wavelength cones, but it also does not excite the red and the green, that is, long and medium wavelength cones, to the same extent and at the same time. This is crucial. If it were not the case, we would not be able to recognize the same blue object in the reddish light of a sunset, because all the red cones would be overloaded with signal and we would be seeing everything red. Rather, our retina and visual cortex subtract the omnipresent red baseline, and we can still see local colors in a wide range of illuminations, adjusting for the local environment. Moreover, continuous stimulation of receptors leads to their adaptation. That is, they become insensitive to a constant stimulus after a while. For example, you don't feel your clothes on unless you're really paying attention. In case of color vision, it is referred to as chromatic adaptation. The first moment we enter a room lit by incandescent lights, everything appears orange, but after a while we stop noticing this orange tint. The same happens in perception of light intensities. Our receptors recalibrate to be sensitive in the relevant range. At noon, light intensity may go beyond 100,000 lux, while under the full moon it's around 1 lux and goes to 1% of that on a moonless night. That is a range of 7 orders of magnitude within which our eyes have to operate. The totality of mechanisms that allow us to retain more or less consistent visual perception under different lighting conditions is termed color and lightness constancy. How does all of this relate to using white paper? The paper encloses the scene that you are building in your painting, and in the beginning, it is just one giant white point against which everything would appear dark. When you progress into your painting, you may find yourself in a position when everything appears too light and you would have to deepen not just the shadows, but all the mid-tones as well, and it's a huge waste of time and not fun to do. Your pastels may refuse to layer further and you will have to erase, and pastel matte paper is notoriously bad at erasing. If you have a background that is somewhat close to your average light value or your midtone, you can avoid most of these issues. Moreover, for opaque paints, such as oils or acrylics, using a neutral colored surface as a palette may greatly facilitate color mixing. The old masters used imprimatura or underpainting and mixed their colors on wood not only because it was the most easily available surface, but also because it makes it easier to establish the value hierarchy. Sometimes you have to deal with white paper. For example, in watercolors, you would paint on white most of the time. But even then, I prefer to cover the whole paper with a very light wash of the color of my light source to unify the image. There is another minor reason to use toned paper for pastels, even if your value contrasts are spot on. If you decide to use a fixative, your best bet is a light neutral paper color. Fixative is a bad idea most of the time, as most of them do not really fix pastels and alter colors horribly. Of those I tried so far, the Pastel Revolution Freezer is the best, as it affects color in the most predictable manner and actually fixes the pigment on the paper. It is a liquid applied by a mist spray bottle, not an aerosol, and you are supposed to soak the piece in it and let it dry. It adds some sort of a weak binder to the pigment and allows it to sink into the paper fibers, which is especially evident on pastel matte. 2 problems may arise. The first problem happens if you use fixative on thin layers of pastels. The pigment liquefies, but there is just not enough of it to cover the whole surface, and it may clump in places, so the paper may begin to show through. White spaces generally look more noticeable than light brown or light gray. This is not the end of the world. You can lightly paint over it, blend the pigment in, and apply the fixative again. But if it happens in a highly detailed area, you may need to do a lot of fixing. Unrelated to white paper, another issue that may happen with this or any other fixative is that your lights will darken. This happens because the whites become more transparent. It occurs with cheaper pastels that you chalk to mix tints instead of titanium white. Titanium white will not turn transparent and disappear under fixative, but chalk will. This is why it may be better to use a lighter paper color instead of black or dark gray. Drawing towards completion, I was thinking what the name of this piece should be. Whenever possible, I prefer to choose names that add something to the image and provide an additional interpretation. But this time I decided on something very straightforward: Loana. Tell me what you think about it in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and recommend it to your fellow Romanophiles.